Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here at the Dialogue, both in person and online, for a conversation about a topic that frankly does not get enough attention in Washington. We're especially encouraged by the large virtual audience tuning in. It's a clear sign of the growing interest in U.S. Caribbean relations. And also the fact that we have a full house is wonderful. So thank you all for making the trek in the heat to come to the Dialogue. The partnership between the United States and the countries of the Caribbean matters deeply. It has direct implications for our security, for our economies, for our energy futures, and for our approach to managing migration. The Caribbean is also often described as the United States' third border. While this term may be overused, it captures a basic truth. This is a relationship rooted in geographic proximity, deep ties, and shared interests. And I want to just touch on a few dimensions of that relationship so that we're going to have a chance to go into greater depth during the conversation. On the security front, the Caribbean is a major transit hub for illicit drugs moving north to the US and Europe, but also for firearms moving south from the United States to the region. Nearly 3/4 of the guns recovered in the Caribbean have been traced back to the United States. And of course, these aren't just statistics, they're fueling violence and undermining institutions. So tackling these transnational challenges demands close and sustained cooperation. Turning to trade and investment, the Caribbean looks to the US as its largest trading partner, and that relationship runs both ways. The region is one of the top US export markets on a per capita basis, with over $30 billion in two-way trade in 2023. When it comes to energy, we've seen Guyana's transformation into a major oil-producing country in recent years, and Suriname, of course, isn't far behind. At the same time, there's growing momentum around renewables and alternative fuel sources, areas where the US private sector could play a much greater role. And then, of course, from the ongoing crisis in Haiti, and we also, of course, Cuba's complex political and humanitarian challenges, shaped, of course, both by internal dynamics and longstanding US policy, the need for joint action is clear, particularly as the region also confronts the escalating impacts of climate change and extreme weather. If you factor in China's influence, and the importance of sustained engagement becomes even clearer. So this morning, we'll have the opportunity to explore where this partnership is headed and how we can deepen it. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our moderator, Dialogue Senior Fellow, Eric Jacobs. Very, very distinguished panel. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Rebecca, for those terrific remarks, and as always, for your impressive leadership of the Dialogue. I think no one can disagree that U.S. foreign policy has changed dramatically over the past 6 months or so, since January 20th. And so rapid and so significant, really, that we aren't always able to process what that means for specific subregions, specific sets of countries. So the idea of today's session is really to peel back the onion a bit on U.S. Caribbean relations and understand beyond the meetings, beyond the high-level visits, what recent U.S. foreign policy shifts really mean for the Caribbean and for our relationship. So given how much ground there really is to cover today, I'm not going to spend much more time. We should really get into it. So let me go ahead and introduce this incredibly impressive panel. First, Jacqueline Charles is an award-winning journalist and Pulitzer Prize finalist who serves as a Miami Herald's multilingual Caribbean correspondent, covering Haiti and the English-speaking Caribbean. With over 2 decades of experience reporting on Haiti, she was recognized for her coverage of the 2010 Haitian earthquake and also co-produced an Emmy-winning documentary on the country. She's a 2-time National Association of Black Journalists of the Year and the 2024 recipient of the Elijah Parrish Lovejoy Award. She's also received the Maria Moore's Cabot Prize for coverage of the Americas, the 2023 Excellence in International Reporting Award, and the Overseas Press Club of America's Award for investigation into the assassination of former Haitian President Jovenel Moïse. Next, I'm delighted to introduce my former boss, Ambassador Brian Nichols, who most recently served as Assistant Secretary of State for Western Hemisphere Affairs, but also has an impressive foreign service career, including as ambassador to Zimbabwe and Peru. Today, he serves on the boards of First Quantum Minerals, a global mining company, and also on the board of the Pan American Development Foundation. And last, but certainly not least, another good friend, Ambassador Sarah Ann Lynch, who served as U.S. Ambassador to Guyana and concurrently as the Secretary of State's representative to CARICOM. Ambassador Lynch most recently served as the civilian deputy to the commander of the U.S. Southern Command in Miami, Florida, where she offered strategic advice on geopolitical challenges facing the region. And Ambassador Lynch now serves as senior advisor with Dynamica Americas. So with that, let's jump into it. As I mentioned at the top, over the past 5.5 months, we've really seen seismic shifts in U.S. foreign policy throughout the world, across the board. So I'd really like to ask each of you to initially provide us with your assessment of how the Trump administration's approach to issues ranging from foreign aid to tariffs to migration have impacted and really will impact U.S.-Caribbean relations in the future. So on the one hand, it's certainly encouraging to have a Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, visit 3 Caribbean countries so early in his tenure, going to Guyana, to Suriname, to Jamaica, meeting with other leaders. And just last week, we had the Deputy Secretary of State in Antigua and Barbuda leading the U.S. delegation to the OAS General Assembly meeting. So, showing up and providing this level of high-level kind of engagement certainly matters in the Caribbean. But also, we need to go below the surface and to understand the significance of the major foreign policy actions taken by the Trump administration that impact the Caribbean far beyond these high-level visits. For example, what does a proposed 85% cut to the international affairs budget mean for the Caribbean Basin Security Initiative and our counter-narcotics cooperation? What will be the impact of tariffs for our partners in the region? 10% in most countries, higher in Guyana, which, while lower compared to other countries in the world, are still extremely significant compared to where they've been. And finally, how do migration restrictions, including a travel ban imposed on Haiti, alongside pressure for countries in the Caribbean to take in third country deportees, and a potential ban on 3 additional Eastern Caribbean nations related to citizenship by investment visas. What does that mean? So really interested in hearing your assessment of U.S.-Caribbean relations, but also the opportunities that exist, especially in a year when we have the Summit of the Americas in the Dominican Republic in December. So that's a lot, but let me go ahead and start with you, Jackie. Thanks again.
Thanks. Thank you for inviting me. Thanks for being here. So let me just give you from the perspective of CARICOM. So I was at the CARICOM meeting in Barbados, and this is when these issues were starting to percolate. And what you saw among leaders, there was a timidness first, right, to not really come out and attack the administration. I mean, we've heard a lot of the U.S. third border, we're trying to have these relationships, but there was a representative from the European Union, and her message was clear. We're here, we're not going anywhere, and we want to build this further partnership, with you. And so she was actually extending a hand, especially on issues like climate change, which we saw with the Trump administration in terms of pulling back their funding. And so I think the big question today is going to be, what do the Caribbean leaders do? Do they really go ahead and trying to forge these other relationships, or are they still waiting in the room for the U.S. to show up? And that is especially true in terms of Haiti. I mean, you have a conversation that's going on where, you have this crisis. The U.S. is the pen holder at the UN. And what you're hearing from other countries is that, well, we're waiting for the U.S., we're waiting for the U.S. Yesterday, there was a closed-door meeting, but that meeting was called by, Guyana, Somalia, Sierra Leone, and Panama, A+3, because they were basically getting frustrated. There's a CARICOM meeting that's going to start next week, so it's also going to be interesting now in terms of those conversations. Let me talk specifically about this travel ban issue in terms of the Eastern Caribbean countries. So 4 of the 5 countries that have citizenship by investment, with the exception of Grenada, are being targeted for a travel ban. I mean, Miami Herald, we had heard this very early on, and now we've seen additional stories since our stories about this. And when you look at it and you peel it back, is it really about citizenship by investment? We know the U.S. has always had concerns, but at the same time, we are seeing a policy in this country in terms of deportations with the recent decision to end TPS for Haiti, and where we want to do this mass deportation, and we want to say to these small Caribbean islands, we want you to take third countries. Well, these are countries that have already declared crime and homicide to be a public health problem. Guns that are coming from the United States. You want countries with populations of 40,000, less than 100,000 to take, individuals that have nothing to do with the culture or no connections. It's a lot of pressure that you're putting on. So Caribbean governments have reached out to the administration, which declined to deny or address press reports. But we're waiting to see, are they going to cave in like Costa Rica, Panama, and some of these other countries, or are they going to push back? I mean, the Caribbean today is in a very interesting and difficult position because they want this relationship with the United States, but what are they going to be willing to do? And yes, we've seen with the State Department and Secretary of State Rubio extending this olive branch going out, but there's also concern that we're going to see a repeat of Trump 1, where it's divide and conquer, where you go in and then there's some Caribbean leaders we have good relationships with and others we disregard.
Great, thank you. Brian, over to you.
Testing. It's great to be here and challenging to follow my favorite reporter who knows all about the region. But a few broad thoughts and then some specifics. One, the Caribbean region is a huge opportunity for the United States. And even if you view issues in a very transactional way, as the current administration does, this is a region that has opportunities emerging in oil and gas. This is a region that has opportunities for synergies with the U.S. economy in many different ways, back office operations, renewable energy, education. This is a region that is also subject to tremendous pressure and influence from China. It's a region where China and Taiwan compete for influence. And if countries in the Caribbean suffer severe economic downturns, natural disasters, humanitarian crises, there is a risk for the United States of a substantial migratory outflow to the United States and destabilization in the region. This is also a region where there are deep connections between the American people and the peoples of the region, diasporas from the Dominican Republic, Haiti, Cuba, and many other countries in the East, the English-speaking Caribbean are present in the United States. In terms of how we engage this region, I think there's a tremendous opportunity to increase American investment, the growth in the economies of Guyana and soon Suriname, the opportunities in Trinidad and Tobago, opportunities in the Dominican Republic, those should all be cultivated. The challenge that this region faces, I think, number one is Haiti. It's the largest country in the Caribbean in terms of population, and one that is in a severe humanitarian crisis. And the potential for that crisis to become even more profound. Jackie mentioned the Security Council closed session yesterday. Note that fellow Caribbean countries has the presidency this month or last month in Guyana. The President of Kenya sent a letter to the Secretary General stressing the need for urgent assistance to allow the multinational security support mission to function successfully. And the fact that that mission has been dramatically underfunded and under-resourced. And that's something the international community led by the United States needs to step forward on. The other point that I would make is this is an opportunity for the nations in the region to define their relations with the United States, and they know that the current administration is going to look to bilateralize as many issues as possible, and how they approach that is going to be a central question for them going forward. And then the just final point, I think that there has been an underweighting of the risk that the region faces in Cuba of a humanitarian disaster. The economic situation there is very fragile. The working age population has been hollowed out. We have seen in recent years the effect of lack of infrastructure maintenance play out in the Matanzas oil storage fires, for example, and the effect of severe tropical storms on that country. And a combination of any of those things could really tip Cuba in a way that we haven't seen in many generations. So I'll stop there.
Great, thank you. Sarah Ann.
Is on? Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. Well, it's all been said pretty much, but I will touch on the decrease in foreign aid that you mentioned, Eric, because that is near and dear to my heart, having spent 25 years with USAID. And the portfolios in the Caribbean were always fairly small, much to the chagrin of our Caribbean counterparts, our partners there. But now that they're zeroed out, it's really going to cause a lot of issues, and particularly, I would say, on the disaster preparedness front, because that's a lot of what USAID did in the Caribbean. And we had great success. In 2016 with Hurricane Matthew, some of the work that we had done before in Haiti made the situation less severe. So I think we're just going to wait and see. We're just entering hurricane season right now, and we're going to have to see what develops. But when the first hurricane, a serious hurricane hits, and our Caribbean partners are calling for assistance and we're not there, that's going to be a bad day. And who's going to be there? I think our counterparts, our allies, I see in Guyana especially, the Europeans, the UK, Canada, all in growth mode while we're retrenching. So I think that is not going to be good for our relationships with the U.S. The other thing that USAID did in our foreign assistance work it gave us a seat at the table. It gave us an entry point to discuss other issues with our partners in the region, and we've now lost that as well. I will also touch just a bit on DOD, because I think, again, especially on the disaster front with AID we're usually in the lead when there's a major disaster around the world, and then DOD, comes in and more or less takes its instructions from USAID, but they're going to have to do a lot more. So they're going to be pulled in to disasters that they weren't expecting to, at a level they weren't expecting to be pulled in, potentially taking them away from other duties that they should be focused on. So I sense that that could be a problem. And then finally, on tariffs for the Caribbean, these small countries, I think it could be really devastating to them if they're slapped with some serious tariffs, and it could potentially harm U.S. businesses from exploring all these opportunities that Brian spoke of.
Great, thank you. Taking advantage of the fact that we have two top experts here on Haiti, and I know we could probably talk for hours on Haiti, but just want to ask this next question. Jackie, I know you're just back from Haiti. I know Brian has worked on the country for years. Just want to hear from you both where you see U.S. policy toward Haiti headed. Obviously, Secretary Rubio, Senator, someone who knows the country well. There has not been proactive financial support for the multilateral support mission, but there's not been a rejection of it. And we also sort of are in this new terrain with talk of drones and mercenaries. And what does this mean? And sort of what does this mean for U.S. policy? Where do you think we're headed in the coming months?
I mean, the good question is, does the U.S. know where it's headed or where it wants to go? I mean, what we're seeing right now at this particular juncture is the emergence of two tracks. So on Friday, the Trump administration decided that they were going to end temporary protected status for up to more than 500,000 Haitians. Although yesterday we saw a notice that said there's probably 300 and something thousand who actually have it. But you know, when you think about the fact that you have, let's be conservative, 300,000 people who are here, who were some even before the 2010 earthquake, but a lot of them, at least more than 200,000, that have fled to the United States, many of them professionals, doctors, nurses. And I have to tell you, the Haitian community was sort of torn about this because we saw the brain drain, you know, that was happening. But they're here, and they're not just here getting legal protections, but they're working and they are sending money back to Haiti. And those remittances are keeping people stable. They're allowing people to survive in a country where 5.7 million people are basically going hungry because there isn't enough to eat because the gangs control the roads. And so you have this end of TPS, and we are seeing domestic interest, or the initial public quote was about the fact that Haiti, the conditions had improved. But then when you look at the determination letters, what it's doing is using all of what, you know, the State Department has said. This is a country with widespread gang violence. It's using the fact that gangs were just designated as foreign terrorists and says, you know, instead of offering you protections, we're going to send you back to this. And then you have the foreign service that actually is engaging and trying to figure out, where do we do? Do we continue to support the MSS? Do we get the OAS to, you know, to do this? And there's still the question of the mercenaries and what our level of involvement in terms of the U.S. government is with the, you know, appearance of, you know, this contract, that there's really been no transparency around it. So right now, the policy is just very confusing. I mean, what you have is a record 1.3 million people who have been forced out of their homes. The gangs now control up to 90% of Port-au-Prince. What that means is there's a tiny bit, Petronville, that is not under gang control, and all the experts are saying they find it curious that the gangs have not taken, you know, Petronville. Is it because they don't want to actually take on the challenges of trying to govern? And the gangs are spreading beyond the capital. And so I was in Cap-Haïtien, Cape Haitian, which is the, you know, second largest city, is in the north. You know, if the gangs go to Cape Haitian, it's over. They don't need to be in the South. They don't need to be elsewhere in the Southeast. But if they now are control of your capital and your second largest city, where today it's bursting at the seams because it offers the only international airport out of the country, and people who are being, you know, deported from both the U.S. and the Dominican Republic, that's where they are. That's where they're stuck. That's where they have to go. It's horrible. So the question I'm asking is whether or not our policy is saying that Haitians have to live with the gangs. Because right now we're not seeing the emergence. We don't know what the MSS, as Brian pointed out with the Rudo letter, they're waiting. We know that it's up until September, but what happens after September? And if you're talking about the OAS, well, if you don't provide the funding, you're gonna still have the same challenges that the Kenyans have now in terms of forced generation. There's only 991 bodies on the ground, not 2,500. The equipment most of the time is not working. And you have, you know, just a small number of Haitian police officers, hundreds of Haitian police officers only, that are actually fighting the gangs. And according to the Secretary of State, you have 30,000 to 40,000 gang members. So the math just doesn't add up right there.
So I think there are a number of key challenges for the United States and the international community broadly. Number one, without international security support, it will be impossible to have a return to democratic governance in Haiti. That is the reality. And the Trump administration's focus on having the Organization of American States take the lead on Haiti doesn't change the fact, as Jackie wisely alluded to, that whatever international institution you turn to, they have to be resourced and equipped to take on a massive security challenge. And there is no one who is in that position at this moment. The uh, financial contributions from others in the international community besides the United States are important, and they have failed to step up, with the really exception of Canada, which has provided substantial contributions. But the rest of the international community needs to step forward, and the United States is going to have to provide the lion's share of the resources. That is the reality. There's no country in the world that considers Haiti to be their problem. They view it as the United States problem, with the exception of the Dominican Republic. So that is step one. Step two, intensive diplomacy with the Haitian government to move forward toward preparations for a constitutional plebiscite and an election are vital. Cannot have the rump government of Haiti, a transitional government that has not been elected, governing what they're able to govern for an indefinite period of time forward. There needs to be a return to a democratic path for Haiti. And the third point I would make is the humanitarian risk in Haiti is the most significant humanitarian crisis in our hemisphere. The return of 300,000 people from the United States can only deeply exacerbate that humanitarian crisis. There's a lack of access to health care, clean water, jobs, food, the pervasive sexual and gender-based violence perpetrated by the gangs. All of these things are at levels really never before seen in Haiti, and that's an extreme statement for Haiti. I know that there are a number of experts on Haiti in this room as my eyes fall upon them. I'm seeing you. And depending on time, they may intervene. But I think from a policy standpoint, determining how we engage and realizing that we are going to have to resource the solution as the United States is an inevitability, or we will have a mass migration incident on the shores of the United States, in southern Florida, in Puerto Rico, and elsewhere in the Caribbean, affecting our neighbors and partners.
Great, thank you. Sticking with security, I know Rebecca talked at the top about the impact of drug trafficking and firearms trafficking on the Caribbean, and Sarah Ann, you spoke to some of the impacts of the cuts to foreign assistance. But I wonder, just Sarah Ann and Brian, if you could go a little bit deeper in terms of what the impact of cuts to the Caribbean Basin Security Initiative would mean. And we don't really know the extent to which it is cut. We know that the president has asked for an 85% cut to the international affairs budget, so we have to assume that there's significant cuts everywhere, and certainly the USAID piece is gone. But what does that mean, and are there other opportunities for U.S. Caribbean security cooperation? Are there other actors who will fill the void? So Sarah Ann, let's start with you.
Yeah, well, not as dire maybe as what you described in Haiti. The rest of the Caribbean does face some pretty serious challenges, and they're not simple challenges, so there aren't simple solutions. So I think what's really required is a multifaceted approach to address these challenges, one that's comprehensive, collaborative, and that's basically what we have with the Caribbean Security Initiative, Caribbean Basin Security Initiative. So that initiative was designed to attack these issues from many fronts. So to look at interdiction, for example, to look at law enforcement capacity building, to look at justice sector reform, and to look at providing licit opportunities for the at-risk youth that are in the region so they don't join gangs and go down that dangerous road. And there have been successes. There have been great successes. On the interdiction front, The U.S. Coast Guard, run by JIAD of South at Southern Command mostly, between 21 and 2021, 2022, they interdicted something like over 400 metric tons of cocaine. Just last month, the U.S. Coast Guard ship, the Valiant, interdicted about $200 million worth of illicit drugs. So great successes there. Jamaica has come out and said that homicides are down. I know they're trending up in the region in general, but they're down in Jamaica by about 43%. It was 43% higher last year. So some great successes. And when I was heading up the Latin America and Caribbean Bureau at USAID and in Guyana, I saw firsthand the great work that CBSI did to give youth skills development, vocational education, after-school programs, and then jobs. So they didn't go down that road. So all these things, I think, are very important, and it's why CBSI is vital, and we need to maintain it. But we need to do more, I would say, because the transnational criminal organizations are only getting smarter, and they're using technology, they're adapting, they're just getting smarter and smarter. They're using go-fast boats now and semi-submersibles to carry the drugs north or through the Caribbean. So I think we need to really address these issues because this is right on our border. So we need to get smart too. And I think the first thing we need to do is use new technology. And that can be in the form of drones or sophisticated satellite imagery or maybe high-tech cargo scanners, those types of things. So that's one. I think we also can't take our eye off the ball in South America, the source of the coca. And we need to continue to work with our partners there to eradicate. Need to work in this country on the demand side. I know that's always very difficult, but with increased arrests and penalties and prosecutions, it can be done. And we need to work with our European partners to do the same because much of the coca actually is destined for Europe. And I think those two things, we need to do the same on firearms. We need to somehow reduce the supply, as Jackie was mentioning and others, reduce the supply of firearms and reduce the demand to the extent we can, because those CARICOM meetings, that's always the number one thing they bring up every single time. So I'm sure that'll be number one next week. I think we could also do better on the Coast Guard, even though they've had successes. I think increasing our presence, it's all about presence, would be very useful. Again, getting our European counterparts to get their ships there too, and then getting more of those job opportunities for the youth. So all this means keeping CBSI, maybe adding staff like from Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms in the region as well. It means strengthening CARICOM impacts, and all this requires money. So I know that's where the devil is in the details, and I think because of the funding issues that we're working with right now, or we assume we will be, I think working with our Caribbean partners to see where they can add more, working with our European colleagues to see where they can add more, working with the IFIs and the multilateral development banks. There's a great example in Trinidad and Tobago where they signed a $150 MOU with Exim Bank, specifically focused on security issues. So that would be very important. And I think another thing we should consider looking at is U.S. legislation on JIAD of South's mandate, because right now they have the mandate to only go after the drugs, but if they had the mandate to go after the firearms too, that could be, really a deal breaker. And finally, I'd say we need to enlist the private sector on as much as we can in this region, especially on the jobs front.
Wow, that was great. So just a couple of things to add that a really comprehensive overview. Dealing with the risk of catastrophic damage due to climate events is crucial. So adaptation and mitigation, those were things that these islands don't have the type of resilience that a U.S. state would have. So providing advanced training, support, infrastructure, that's all crucial, and the private sector can have a really important role to play in that. Energy resilience for the region. Most of the countries in the Caribbean over the long term will have a hard time affording hydrocarbons as their primary fuel source or energy source. So moving to renewable sources is a way for them to have price affordability for their citizens and increase resilience. The risk of sea level rise for the countries in the Caribbean is also substantial, and providing infrastructure projects and financing through multilateral development banks to address that, not to mention the private financial sector, I think is vital. On the security side, just to add a couple points to Ambassador Lynch's really great overview, the technologies to trace weapons seized in the region, identify straw purchasers, and prosecute them under U.S. law, led by the task forces that have existed in the United States, I think is something that should continue and is really be redoubled as a way to improve the security situation. Working with regional institutions like CARICOM Impacts to strengthen law enforcement and provide them with the resources to combat and interdict transnational crime in the region is vital. And then again, something that our current administration in the United States should value, leaning on our neighbors, our friends and partners internationally, to increase their resources for the region. The United Kingdom, France, the Netherlands, they all have strong interests in the Caribbean. They should be providing greater assistance. And our colleagues throughout the American system should also be participating and helping in ways that strengthen our partners in the region. And I would just note that we have a great opportunity to do that, having a new Secretary General in the Organization of American States, and Albert Ramdin from the Caribbean, who knows the region intimately, and I think can provide some great leadership around these issues.
Great, thank you both. So I guess moving from challenges to opportunities, Sarah Ann, we've already mentioned that you're ambassador to Guyana. We talked about the oil boom there precisely when you were ambassador in 2019, and what's to come online in Suriname, but also some of the clean energy opportunities with geothermal in St. Kitts and Nevis and Dominica and other countries. What more can the United States do to really capitalize on these opportunities, both from a Trump administration perspective, a congressional perspective, but also from the U.S. private sector? Where's there more room for collaboration to really capitalize on this?
Well, in the broader Caribbean, there are loads of opportunities, as has been mentioned, that we're not really capitalizing on as much. There are a lot of billionaires that are always on those islands all the time, but they're not necessarily investing. So maybe doing some work there. But I also think that a lot of people look at the island nations of the Caribbean the wrong way. They look at them as, individual nations, which they are, so you might want to invest there. But there are regional possibilities that scale up an investment. And I'm thinking specifically of transportation and logistics. The opportunities there would be fabulous. So we just need to get those companies there. I'm always encouraging small and medium-sized companies because those are the hungrier ones, and they might look at smaller markets differently. So I think that's really important. You mentioned Guyana and opportunities. They're just exploding in Guyana right now. So that's really the place for a lot of these companies to be. The oil, just to give you an idea, was first discovered more or less in 2015, first extraction in 2019. ExxonMobil estimates very conservatively that there are 11 billion barrels of oil there. They've been using that talking point for years now, and the wells are the gift that keeps on giving. So it's well beyond that, I'm sure. And it's not just the oil, there's also gas, associated gas. So it's the oil and gas together, and it's what the oil and gas can do for the country and for the region. And what we have in Guyana is a president, a democratically elected president. That took a lot of work on behalf of the US government, by the way. And they have another election coming up this September. But we do have a democracy there. We have willing people. and loads of opportunities. So I think there's a lot that the U.S. can do to exploit those opportunities. When I was there, we did a lot to get U.S. companies down there to take a look, to see what kind of options there were there. But at the same time, I was watching plane loads. We had some success, but plane loads of people coming in from India, from Europe, from other parts of South Asia, from the Middle East, and from China, of course. And so they were looking actively, bidding actively, whereas American companies were much more hesitant and wanted to take their time. And I would say some of them lost out because they took their time. They didn't listen to our advice. So I think what we need to do, it is great that Secretary Rubio, his first trip was to the Caribbean. I think that sends a strong message, but it's not enough. And there haven't been a lot of high-level visits since, I don't believe. So I think getting commerce there is critical, the Secretary of Commerce, if possible, but high-level visitors from commerce to show them all the possibilities. Trade missions are a great way for companies to learn about the nations that they're visiting and for those nations to show off what they have to bring to the table. So I think those are really some very important things we can do, and we should also just continue to educate the U.S. private sector on all of the possibilities there.
Terrific, thanks. And Brian, you mentioned your opening remarks, the competition between China and Taiwan and the Caribbean. The Caribbean has 5 of the remaining Taiwan recognizers in the world. What more can be done by the United States to really curb Chinese influence in the Caribbean at this moment, both in terms of positive engagement and sort of other influence?
Well, I think the first thing is to make sure that we're providing a better offer than the PRC, and that means treating the nations there with respect, facilitating greater private sector investment in the region. I think a key impediment to investment is the financing piece, so working both with the U.S. private sector financing options, where we have just tremendous wellsprings of wealth that we can bring into the investment space with the right public encouragement, and then using multilateral institutions to facilitate that. Another key gap in the region we've talked about a lot is the security gap, and thus far, China has not provided that much in the way of security-related investment in the region. But woe is us in the United States if suddenly countries start to receive major Chinese security investments. Port infrastructure is another area where all of the countries need help in revising their seaports and their airports. The construction of greater logistical facilities there, just something which is a Chinese specialty, where we can play a positive role. Educational exchanges. The United States is a major destination for Caribbean students to study at the university level, and making sure that we remain welcoming to international students is another way to strengthen those relationships. The PRC is very much focused on becoming a global hub for tertiary education and postgraduate education, and that would be a great loss for the United States if we lose that strategic advantage that has served us so well in the post-World War II era. And then the final point that I would make is making sure that we also make it clear to our partners in the region that we will remain the region's best partner, and that hugging us close is in their strategic interest, but in a positive way. I think the impact of a negative approach, a more punitive approach, would be short-lived.
Great, thank you. And Jackie, let me ask you one last question before we open it up. Brian mentioned Albert Ramdin is the new OAS Secretary General, the first time in the organization's 77-year history. You have the UN Secretary General elections coming up in about a year from now, and Mia Motley is considered a possible candidate. We don't know if she will be or not, or she will be elected, but she's certainly someone who has elevated the Caribbean on the world stage when it comes to climate issues, when it comes to highly indebted countries and sort of their place in the world and what they're looking for. Is there an opportunity for greater Caribbean leadership on the world stage? And what could that mean for some of these issues that we've been talking about?
Well, I mean, definitely there is greater opportunity, and I think what you're seeing with Ramden, there is excitement, and people are seeing those opportunities much more clearly right now. You know, Brian mentioned the multilaterals, and I was thinking about the fact that one of the arguments the Caribbean governments have been talking about for years is the fact that they're highly indebted, and on paper they're considered to be middle-income countries, but in reality they're not middle-income countries. You're struggling, and basically, you know, the biggest product that they have is, you know, is tourism, and we saw what happened during, you know, during the COVID pandemic. And so what they've been asking, you know, the World Banks and, you know, the IDBs is, can we change this formula? You know, and also asking the U.S., can you step in and help us here? And we haven't seen that happen, and that is the reason why a lot of Caribbean governments have turned to China in the Belt and Road program. You know, they don't read the fine print, or they did, but you see that the interest rates are like explosive. But at this point, they're saying, you know what, I need to bring roads, I need to bring infrastructure. That is what, you know, my population, that's what they're asking of me. So, you know, you'll do it now, and we'll deal with the fallout later. And as the United States starts to pull away from the region with the funding cuts, with the restrictions on visas and not allowing students to come, you're going to create this opening for China. China is going to start to provide that security support because they're already taking, you know, some of the security personnel and sending them to China, you know, for training. And that is where countries like Guyana, Jamaica, that is where they find themselves, that paradox right now, right? You want to have that close relationship with the United States. You have it. You have that visit by the Secretary of State, who, you know, was interesting when you saw that press conference. You know, you don't want to offend your host, and the whole issue, we didn't talk about this with the Cuban doctors and things like that. But at the same time, what we have not seen, and what you're probably not going to see, is this let go of China so quickly. And so, as a journalist, that's where I'm watching, you know, that relationship, because China serves a role, and the more and more we pull out, the more and more we give them, you know, latitude and strengthen their presence.
Terrific, thank you. So why don't we go ahead and open it up? Maybe I'll collect a few first round of questions, and then we can go around. Go ahead.
Hi, Alex Sanchez. I'm a journalist, cover defense issues. Question about SAFCOM. Just this past month, SAFCOM has been very active in the Caribbean. The hospital ship Comfort was in Grenada like 3 weeks ago. Exercise trade winds took place in Trinidad and Tobago between April and May. Admiral Halsey, the new commander, has been to Trinidad and Tobago and other countries. What is your expectation for SAFCOM for the next 4 years when it comes to budget, assets? You know, do you think the command will receive new lethal combat ships or any other assets for operations in the Caribbean? And also when it comes to Guyana, you talked a lot about Guyana's wealth, oil and gas. Venezuela continues to claim Guyanese territory. How far, and there have been several border incidents, how much more can the US, DOD, SAFCOM wait before they act to help Guyana, given that we know that the President Maduro's regime will continue to try to control the Essequibo region? Thank you.
Could you say a bit about AI data sovereignty? I see that CARICOM has an article on that. I think that a couple of years ago, quite good work was being done on that, but I think now probably the high-tech companies don't want to become too associated with that till they understand what Trump's view of the whole region is. But it's still a way to really get to the diversity, the core advantages of particular countries. It's a good approach if it's allowed to be done openly.
Thank you. Great panel and discussion. Thank you. Matt Tappel with the National Democratic Institute. I wanted to ask a couple Haiti questions. What role do you see the international community can play in improving governance by the Transitional Presidential Council? It seems like they haven't fully implemented some of their basic agreement, the April agreement, and they're not addressing security. What role can the U.S. or others play in getting that to be ideally a model of governance going forward in the transition? And what role do you see the OAS playing practically in Haiti going forward, given particularly the pressure they're under from the U.S. now?
Thank you. Dan Erickson with Covington. Agree, it's a great panel. This December, the Dominican Republic is supposed to host or will host the Summit of the Americas. It'll be the second time a Caribbean nation has hosted this summit, the last one being Trinidad. What's your prognosis for the summit and the role the Caribbean can play?
Great. Why don't we start with those four, and then we'll go out for another round. Maybe Sarah Ann, we'll start on your end this time.
Okay, I can address the Southcom. The steady drumbeat of visits to the region that you are seeing, it's not unusual. At least my experience there, I served with two commanders, General Richardson and Admiral Halsey, and they both said, you know, we're the smallest, least resourced geographic command, but we have two things. We have an airplane and we have a voice. And so we're going to go there because presence matters. It matters to be in the field. It matters to meet with partners. It matters to discuss things bilaterally and as a group. So Southcom does some sub-regional conferences every year, Central America, South America, and the Caribbean. Those will continue. Trade Winds is a fabulous way for the Caribbean, our Caribbean military partners, as well as allies, to gain expertise and share lessons learned and just improve their security capabilities. And Guyana hosted twice while I was in Guyana, so I firsthand saw what that can do. So those will continue. I think Admiral Halsey is being very proactive, like General Richardson. He knows that he needs to be in the region to understand the region. And he also knows that others can't get there as easily, so that he makes up for some of that. In terms of Venezuela, what Southcom does is watch that very carefully. The Venezuelan aggression on Guyana is real, and while I think we don't assess they will actually ever invade because there won't be much support for that internationally, Guyana takes this very seriously. We take it very seriously. ExxonMobil takes it very seriously. There are a lot of issues going on there that we want to make sure Venezuela does not get more aggressive than it already has. You know, they had a vote a couple months ago electing, some leadership in the Essequibo, saying that, they were Venezuelan, but saying, again, reaffirming their stance that they own 2/3 of the country of Guyana. What Southcom has done is had flyovers at critical moments in Georgetown and getting close to the Essequibo, and that has sent a strong message to Venezuela. So things like that will continue.
I would just add to that, the U.S. position historically has been that there is a international process to determine the legal sovereignty in the Essequibo, the border dispute between Venezuela and Guyana, and also between Suriname and Guyana, and that those international processes should be respected. We consider the current borders to be authoritative until a competent body rules otherwise. I think the expectation from the international community overwhelmingly is that the current borders will be upheld. It would be a catastrophic miscalculation by the Maduro regime to think that they could change those borders by force. And I would ask students of history to explain historically what has happened when a larger country has invaded a smaller resource oil rich country with ties to the United States as sort of an example of how this might play out. The other thing that I would note is the leadership of Guyana and President Ali has really been a great partner for the United States. And I think that I expect that relationship to continue to grow and deepen year after year. And I think if there's a priority for us in the Caribbean region, it's making sure that we have a really great relationship with Guyana.
Yeah, I've been embedded on a couple of Southcom visits to the region, and I will just say that, when the Caribbean governments feel that we are not present, the fact that the Southcom commander goes and visits and he has those relationships with the various military units, and it shows the presence of the United States, that goes a long way. That continues to maintain those ties. And I would just say with Guyana in general, it's just been a very exciting time. I've been in Guyana when people were fleeing Guyana. Everybody that had a college degree and a U.S. visa, left. And I remember being there for the 50th anniversary of their independence, and people were starting to come back. And when you talk to people in the United States, Guyanese Americans, they're saying, "I'm going to retire, in Guyana." So it's really great to see a country in the region, have that progress. There was a question about AI. I suspected at this CARICOM meeting they're going to start talking about it. Unfortunately, what happens with us in the Caribbean is we kind of are late coming to the party. At the last CARICOM meeting, there were discussions about Netflix and how we're losing out all of this money, and how can we monetize that. And so I'm looking to see more and more conversations, around that issue. You asked about Haiti. So there's February 7th, 2026 is supposed to be the expiration date of this 9-member transitional government. August 3rd, the current president is supposed to pass the baton to Laurent St-Cyr, who's from the private sector, and which is interesting, probably one of the only stakeholders that has not distanced themselves from their representative on the council. And the conversation in Haiti right now is where do you go from here? Do you keep this current council that has been riddled with corruption and allegations and lack of governance and hasn't really tackled the security situation? Can this country go to elections? There's talk about elections at the end of the year, no matter what. The constitutional issue Brian mentioned, I'm sorry, but it's a mess. Last week, Fritz Jean, the current president, distanced himself from the whole process. One of the recommendations is, okay, the president could be elected back-to-back terms, but 2 terms, but governors could be elected perpetually. So you're going to be in a situation where you have a governor who's been in office for 20 years, and the president wants to visit the region, and that governor say, you can't come to my country. How do you do a process like this in a situation where the population have not really been able to have a debate, to have a discussion because of the gang crisis? So, what people are saying is like, what do you do? They're not going to fire themselves. Do you wait till February 6th, where we have another situation what happened last year with Henri, or do you do something now? And I think that's the challenge for the international community, right? That's going to be the challenge for the U.S. I mean, how much do you intervene or put your hands on the scale or don't? One of the challenges which CARICOM has been, that CARICOM has really been the facilitator trying to mediate. But what we've seen in terms of mediation is at some point somebody has to take a decision, somebody has to pull the plug, and you haven't seen that. So unfortunately, you have a panel right now that lacks a huge amount of credibility. And are they able to regain that credibility and to take this country to an election when it was an election that put Haiti on the road to the current crisis that it's in?
Great, thank you. And then I just want to make sure we get Dan's question on the Sum of the Americas. I don't know if anyone wanted to take that.
So maybe I'll just jump in here just to finish up on Haiti. I would note that unfortunately, again, the path to progress has to go through security. So the question was posed, like, what more can the United States, the international community do to influence or affect the course of events of the Transitional Presidential Council and the Haitian government. If we can't deliver greater security as an international community, our ability to influence events is going to be extremely limited, and that is just the reality. Turning to the Summit of the Americas, I think this is a great opportunity for the Trump administration to have a conversation with the region about issues that matter to us. And making sure that the economic and trade relationships in the region are strengthened to the benefit of all, but also to the benefit of the United States. The challenge that we face around critical minerals, in particular, this is a region that is enormously wealthy in mineral resources, and having those types of conversations with our partners is vital. The annual meetings that President Xi has with countries in Latin America and the Caribbean, as well as Africa, the summits that he hosts, he never misses those. So if he can find the time to do that, I would hope that our leaders in the United States will find the time to engage with our regional partners. This is a historic moment in recent centuries where the intensity of the competition between the United States as the incumbent power and China as the rising power, the future of those relations are being determined now. And the centrality of engagement in the region to our success in shaping the future, it cannot be overstated. So I hope that not only will the president engage at the leader level for the Summit of the Americas, I also hope that across the U.S. government at the cabinet level, the cabinet secretaries will engage with their counterparts in the region in the run-up to the summit. And then finally, I would just note that for the Caribbean and for the Dominican Republic, this is a tremendous opportunity to show off its best to the region and to U.S. leadership in a way that can positively shape that relationship going forward for the rest of this administration.
And just follow up a little bit on the leadership showing up issue. I was in Suriname just after the last Summit of the Americas for the CARICOM annual meeting, and they were thrilled that President Biden showed up. It wasn't clear he was going to, actually, for a while. And in fact, some of the Caribbean partners were thinking about not attending the Summit of the Americas. But the fact that they did, and they met with the president, even if it wasn't very long, it's more than a photo op. I mean, we sometimes think of it as a photo op, but they can take that back to their countries and say, oh, when I was with the president, we discussed, so it's credibility. So I think it's really important that the leadership shows up. I also think the last Summit of the Americas, what I heard very positively from the region was that they felt it was, the actionable items came out of it. It wasn't just a conference for a conference sake. And for this region, 3 working groups were set up to address food security, energy security, and economic security. And they were going gangbusters for a while with these working groups and making some real progress and establishing milestones. And I think those were the 3 key areas and very important to the Caribbean. I don't know that that work has been sustained at this point, but I think the folks in the Caribbean would hope that the next summit likewise has actionable activities.
Great, thank you. I know we're over time, but since I promised us a second round, are there any burning questions? We can do a lightning round. Okay, Mary, go ahead.
One country was mentioned only very briefly, I think, a country that used to be the center of U.S. foreign policy in the region, and that's Cuba. I wonder if there's any signs, and this is supposed to be a lightning round, but any signs of new thinking on Cuba? We've been stuck in the same pattern for a long time over various administrations. Any movement on that?
Peter.
Hi. I came here hoping that there would be some indication of that you don't have to be pessimistic about the future. I was hoping for some indications of optimism. And I don't mean the coulds or woulds or maybes or hope for, but sort of anything concrete outside from the oil in Guyana that you would point to and say, aha, there's a new leader in X, there is a new X in Y. But there was just no mention of something that's ongoing that looks promising.
Great.
On a very opposite pessimistic side. So what would lead the gangs to actually overthrow the Pétionville government that they have not overthrown yet? I think because of wanting to have some rump government in place. And are we ready for the day after that?
Hello, my name is Oskari Rantamaki. I'm an intern at the Osgood Center for International Studies. And just a more basic question for somebody who's not as experienced in this. As an economic rival that China is, what in your opinion is the greatest threat that China poses to US foreign policy in gaining influence over the Caribbean? And is that influence primarily an economic concern or more of a national security risk as well? Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. We'll go with those four. So we got Cuba, optimism, pessimism, and gangs, and Chinese threats. So we'll start with you, Jackie.
Oh, wow. Okay. Look, I mean, one of the conversations that people have been saying, right, among Haitians is that, well, if they want us to stay in this country and they're going to pull out, then I guess we've got to get our act together, right? Is this the moment that Haiti returns to 1802? You know, 1802 was when you had the divisions. People were fighting for the French. People were fighting against slavery, and then they realized that Napoleon wanted to put Haitians back in bondage, and so they all decided to come together because they identified the common enemy. Haitians today have not yet identified the common enemy. There's still divisions. So, is this the moment where they start to see the larger problem, the population that's suffering under this gang crisis? So that's your optimism, and that's what people are hoping. On the gangs, the gangs are united and they're not united. The gangs are making, according to the Haitian government, $60 million US a year just in the tolls that they charge from containers, bringing food and other supplies. They're making additional millions with the fuel with the fuel trucks. And so, they're making money. Do they really want to govern the country? And can they agree? Some gang leaders are more politically astute, than others. But the fear here and the reality is this, is that you're looking at a country that is completely collapsing in front of you. I just came back from Haiti from a funeral, from a relative that died as a result of the lack of health care and all of that. And I had relatives who came from Port-au-Prince, and I asked them, how did they make it to the north? And they had to get off of the bus 3 times at gang checkpoints, where the gangs then basically checked them, and they went on the buses, checked their phones. And at any given moment, anybody on that bus could have been killed or raped. That's the reality that Haitians live with every single day. You don't know when you're next. Their entire neighborhoods that have been burned. Their kids, most of these, they're 8-year-old kids with AKs and, other heavy power, rifles. So, and that's what we're not talking about. You mentioned the mercenaries earlier. So you're dropping weaponized drones, but so are you going to kill the kids? And what do you do about preventing that kid that's being offered $5 to go set fire to somebody's business to say, you know what, I have another alternative here. So yes, I don't know what the day after that looks like, but it's not pretty.
So on Cuba, certainly the current administration, the Trump administration, has put forward very much a return to the first Trump term foreign policy approach to Cuba. I would say that the material difference has been that the differentiation between Cuban migrants and other migrants has diminished. So the ability of Cubans to come to the United States and obtain residency is significantly diminished. The risk of catastrophic collapse in Cuba, I would continue to posit, is higher than it has been in our lifetimes. So how this administration would respond to that is something that they have not publicly elaborated on. Would they provide humanitarian assistance? How would they approach a potential migratory crisis in Cuba? The other point that I would make in response to the sort of good news and bad news, pessimism, optimism, my optimism in the Caribbean centers around the continuing wealth of human capital in the region. There are a lot of smart, well-educated, talented people in the region. Giving them reasons to stay in their home countries rather than emigrate to the United States or the European Union or the UK is important. And that means working to facilitate opportunities in the region. Pessimism and getting to the China question in the region, what is the risk? If there is a significant increase in China's security-related presence in the Caribbean, if you had like a Subic Bay type Chinese base in the Caribbean, that would be a dramatic change for how we would have to be postured from a security standpoint. This administration, the Trump administration, has talked about the vital importance of the Panama Canal, for example. There's debate about the Chinese investment in the port of Chancay in Peru, another example. Imagine the presence of a greater ring of Chinese investment, but coupled with a massive security-related presence, aircraft carriers, frigates, things like that. I think that would make people feel very queasy about American security in our region. So we need to make sure that we are offering a positive alternative to that, a potential outcome.
Okay, on optimism, I'm optimistic about rising, new-ish, talented leadership in the region. So Ramdeen, I know he's been around for a while, but taking on this new role, very exciting. Mia Motley, who's been around for a bit, but such a strong leader. And Irfan Ali, not so well known a while back. He's really a rising star, taking on increased roles at CARICOM. He was very influential at the last Summit of the Americas on a number of issues. Guyana is currently serving as an elected non-permanent member of the UN Security Council. So, I mean, Guyana's whole presence is rising both regionally and internationally, I would say, and he's at the helm of it. So those leaders, I think, are something to watch in the region, and I'm very optimistic about them. So I'm not going to do pessimism. On China, I think it is mostly the economic threat in the region, but it can bleed into a security threat, as Ambassador Nichols was mentioning with the Chancay port. Very easily could be used for defense purposes not commercial. But the economic threat is real. I experienced it with the gas to energy project in Guyana, which finally we worked really hard to help a U.S. consortium win an almost $1 billion bid against 4 Chinese state-owned enterprises. It was a fight. It was a battle. But I think the positive news there, getting back to optimism, is that we can do it. We can do these things, but it just takes a lot of persistence and hard work.
Thank you. Well, thank you all. There's been a really terrific session, and I know we really barely scratched the surface on a number of these issues, so hopefully we'll find ways to dig deeper on all this. But please join me in giving a round of applause to the outstanding panelists. Thank you.